Guys, this is Carter here, back with chapter number 2, and this is Crash Course Ramen, but this time I've stepped up my game a little bit. So I thought about what I could do better from last time, and last time was pretty half-hearted attempt, so this time we're going to do it right. Anyways, just to satisfy the crowd so you don't have to look 30 minutes into the video, I will start off by eating a slice of ramen. Not a slice of ramen, what the heck, a slice of ramen? What's a slice of ramen? Alright. Here we go, folks. Let it begin. There you go. Are you happy? Alright. I hope you're happy, because now we're going to get down to business. So what I've essentially done here for you is I've created a mind map, and I'm going to go through this so fast. We're going to be so efficient. It's going to be so great. Without further ado, let's jump in right here. As we slowly zoom in on our starting point. Chapter 2, the Constitution. So first thing to talk about. The first 2 pages, very broad information. We're starting on page 30 and page 31. Information is pretty much an intro to the chapter. There's nothing super important. What I took away from it was that it's very difficult to pass amendments. Only 27 amendments have been passed out of 1,000 attempts. So bear that in mind. Very hard for everyone to agree on passing amendments. So let's move on to page number 32 right here. So what is this chapter going to be about? This chapter is going to be about a total of 6 things. Number 1, roots of the American nation, history surrounding the break with Britain. It's going to be the first one. Number 2, wherever 2's at, the first attempt at American government, which was the Articles of Confederation. 3 is writing the Constitution in Philadelphia. And number 4, wow, they're all over the place, boys, the U.S. Constitution. Number 5, drive for ratification of the U.S. Constitution. And number 6, methods of amending the U.S. Constitution. So without further ado, let's start with number 1, which is going to be bottom of page 32. We're going to jump right over here. So, in summary, separation from Britain the physical separation from Britain, it forced Britain to accept that the colonists were going to have their own independent governments from them. And in general, one thing to note, King James I was our king at this point in time. Examples of this agreement that the colonies were going to let, or that the king was going to let them kind of self-govern. The examples of this was the elected colonial assembly, which is the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1619, and the general court that governed the Massachusetts Bay Colony after 1629. I'm going to zoom in one more tad right there. So what's interesting about this is that over in England, there's British traditions, to name a few: feudalism, the rigid class system, absolute authority of kings. All of these things were absent in the New World colonies. Along with this there was no single church. You had the Church of England that did not exist in the New World. So along with that, there was no barriers into crafts because the guild and craft system was not in the New World. So why was this important? This was important because the colonies were starting to develop their own identity. This identity, slowly but surely, over time, became more and more separate from Britain's identity. So things really worked out for about 140 years until the early 1760s, when things began to weaken. And still largely due to the huge physical communication barrier, and also known as the Atlantic freaking ocean. Because oceans are absolutely huge, and it's very hard to stay on point with those. So now let's jump to the next concept. Trade and taxation. This is going to be page 33. Let's talk about mercantilism. Mercantilism is an economic theory designed to increase a nation's wealth through the development of commercial industry. Now, this came out in the colonies in the form of strict rules over importing and exporting goods in order to beat out trade rivals. Trade rivals was, i.e., Holland. So essentially, Britain had a policy of controlling the colonies' exports and imports to some level. They kind of regulated trade in return for not taxing the colonies. It was kind of interesting because wow, I said 1950s. Wow, 1950s. That is wrong, folks. I am sorry about that. It was 1650. That's super embarrassing. Sorry about that, guys. So, in the 1650s, we started the Navigation Act, and this was essentially Britain regulating the colonies, but it was largely ignored by the colonists. And like I was saying, there's a subtle agreement between colonists and government, which was essentially, you leave us alone in terms of taxes, and we will give you the right to regulate trade and conduct national affairs. Do I need to zoom in again? Yeah, a little bit more. A little bit more. So that's kind of that was the start, the Navigation Acts. But for the most part, things were going real good all the way up until the beginning of the rebellion. Now, what was the beginning of the rebellion? Well, it all started in 1756 to 1763 with the French and Indian War. Essentially, the Treaty of Paris gave Britain a boatload of land, and the colonists were like super freaking hyped to move west and stuff. And then we had this big long list of sad things that started to happen. In 1763, right after the end of the French and Indian War, all the colonists were like, "Let's go, boys, let's go explore, woo!" And then Britain was like, "Nah, dudes, nobody is allowed to move west." Britain was worried about the interaction with Indians, and they had a few reasons. They want to keep people contained. The further away west people got, the harder it was to control those people. They were already worried somewhat about their control over the colonies. And people were kind of angry about that. They're kind of salty, but they're like, okay, fine. But then in 1764, wham, bam, bam, Britain's like, yo, we just saved you guys. We got you a bunch of land. We're really cool, but we need to pay off our debt. So we're going to tax you guys because we defended you. And the colonists were like, what? Taxes? We never had to pay taxes like ever. What are you doing, man? I don't like that. So 1764 was the Sugar Act to raise money to pay off the war. It was taxes on sugar, wine, coffee, and other common exports to the colonies. Now, in 1765, the Stamp Act mandated by law that all paper items brought and sold in the colonies carry a stamp mandated by the Crown. This stamp obviously cost money, and this triggered the colonists. The colonists were really salty about this one because the Sugar Act, they're like, fine, okay, and there was a few people that were trying to get people riled up, but people were like, okay, whatever. But the Stamp Act, this is, once again, Britain kind of pushing in, it's kind of like when you're poking your friend, but slowly and slowly the poke is harder and harder and harder. Well, this would be kind of that first firm poke, just enough that you're annoyed. And for the colonists, this was a big deal because they had a lot of freedom of press. There wasn't much control over that type of thing. So this was really Britain trying to find ways to get as much money from they can from the colonists. So this was the turning point very soon. We're getting close. 1765, we already talked about the Stamp Act. So this is the first point where things got really, really bad, and this was the 1765 Quartering Act, which was the insult to injury. It required the colonists to furnish barracks or provide living. Oh, wow, Spotify commercial, guys. Wow, was not ready for that. Was not ready for that. Rip the dream. Actually, let's have a ramen break while we're waiting for that commercial to end. We're going real quick right now, though. Man, so awkward. But it's Crash Course Ramen, so I have to eat ramen. Even though it's 12 o'clock at night, of course I'm eating ramen. So, the Quartering Act, 1765, you have to house soldiers. Now, this pissed everybody off. Everybody off. And this led to Day New England groups formed. This was the Sons of Liberty, led by Samuel Adams, your local beer guy who ran his family's brewery business out of business, and your boy Patrick Henry. Bear in mind, there was also some Daughters of Liberty too. They don't get talked about much. Riots burned down government official homes. Tax collectors of Britain were threatened, official tax collectors, and boycotts were put into place by your everyday colonist. It'd be like if suddenly the United States government decided we were going to put a tax on like pop and water and everything. You guys wouldn't be happy campers. But colonists are pretty edgy. You got a lot of edgy people, and they don't like taxes at all, because they had 140 years where they weren't even touched, and now they're being infringed upon. Anyways, 1767, the Townshend Act. This was really when things start to heat up right here, because essentially the Townshend Act taxed all sorts of imports, including the colonists' favorite drink, tea. And we all know how the colonists feel about tea. We had the Boston Massacre occur in 1770. Really, these three little acts right here kind of caused building tensions, and things were building and building and building until the Boston Massacre of 1770. That's when things got really, really bad. Like, really, really not good at all, at all, at all. For everybody. Everybody was worried. So, here comes, finally, after the Boston Tea Party. Actually, let me resume music, because music makes it way more epic. There it is. Perfect soundtrack. Perfect soundtrack for AP government. So, where was I? Yes. The Townshend Act, when the Boston Tea Party, when all the colonists dumped tea, George III over here heard it, and he was like, this is the final draw. King George III, also known as saying, the die has now been cast. And he created the Coercive Acts, which was called by the colonists the Intolerable Acts. It called for a total blockade of the Boston Harbor until payment for the dumped tea happened. So this was pretty much King George being like, okay, that's it. Enough is enough. I am absolutely stopping the colonies until they stop this madness. Now this was the step. This is when things really started to heat up. It's the first step towards independence. Now remember, after the Townshend Acts and after the Boston Massacre, we had the 1772 Committee of Correspondence, and as some of our classmates like to call it, it was the colony Twitter. Pretty much all the colonies were just communicating with each other about what was happening. Now, what's important was in 1765. As a reaction to the Stamp Act, the Stamp Act Congress was created. 9 of the 13 colonies sent representation, and this was actually, this was as a result of the Stamp Act. I actually forgot to connect this one, so I feel really bad about this one. But this was actually the first colonial interaction together. All the colonies sent some delegates, and they cried about no taxation without representation. They wanted representation in Parliament, and that was as a result of the Stamp Act. So that was actually the first thing. And then we had the 1772 Committee of Correspondence, which was responding to Boston Massacre, all that lovely stuff. And then in 1774, after the Coercive Acts, we had the First Continental Congress, which had 56 delegates. And actually, we're sprinting through right here, so let me find the right page. We're really going through here quick. Yep, Committee of Correspondence is page 35. Right now, we are approximately on page 36 right now. Yes, page 36 is where we're at. 1774 is the First Continental Congress, 56 delegates. And in 1775, the First Continental Congress said that if the terms from the First Continental Congress were not reached, they would have a Second Continental Congress. That First Continental Congress was asking for the removal of a bunch of the taxes. King George III was like, nah, dude, we're not doing that. So then the Second Continental Congress was formed because the king did not take the terms from the first. They sent out the Olive Branch Petition. This was kind of the last chance. It's kind of amazing that they still were trying to have peace at this point. King George III was like, we don't want that. So things got real sketchy because the problem is that a lot of the colonists are still loyal to the crown. So what do? Benjamin Franklin talks to his buddy Thomas Paine into writing a huge hit. Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense in 1776. 120,000 copies were sold all over the colonies. That's equivalent to 1 in 17 people by modern day standards. So, and the other thing too is that not everyone could read back then. So I did some research, and it would probably be equivalent to about 1 in 5 people had either heard or read Common Sense back then, which is huge because everyone else who didn't read it probably talked about it or at least heard about it. So this thing was like all over the place. This was the really, really big deal. Really, really big deal. So then, after the Second Continental Congress, Olive Branch Petition didn't work, we then had the Declaration of Independence, July 2nd. This was written by a bunch of our buddies like Thomas Jefferson, and John Locke had a huge influence on this. Obviously, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all those lovely concepts. And now we are going to go back to the starting point. This is the end of this flow. We're going to go back to the middle, and that's the first section done. So we have finished up Route 1. We are now on to Route 2. I'm about to cough. Man, it's 12 o'clock at night. Actually, it's tomorrow. It's a new day right now. And a new day calls for a new bite of ramen. Of course. Okay. So, the first attempt at American government. The Articles of Confederation. So, in 1777, during wartime, the Articles of Confederation were formed to try to find a temporary solution to unity among the colonies. Now, what is the definition of a confederation? A confederation is a type of government where the national government derives its powers from the states. It's a league of independent states working together. The first thing I thought of was like the Athenian League and like some of those way old things, but it's not quite that, but that's just what popped into my head. So, let's talk about no. The Articles was supposed to do the following things. And this is on page 39, bottom of page 39. The Articles of Confederation was supposed to be a national government with a Congress empowered to make peace, coin money, appoint officers for an army, control the post office, and negotiate with Indian tribes. Each state was supposed to retain its independence and sovereignty or ultimate authority to govern within its territory, so states still had complete power. One vote in the Continental Congress for each state, regardless of size, and the vote of 9/13 states to pass any measure. Now, that's to pass a measure, which should be like a law, but if you want to actually change the Articles of Confederation, it took a unanimous vote. Over here, the selection and payment of delegates to Congress by their respective state legislators. So these were all things that the Articles of Confederation was supposed to accomplish, but all the power was left in the state hands, so it was very difficult for the national government to accomplish anything, and that's why we're jumping over here. Problems with the Articles. The biggest thing was loyalty to states and not national government. I'm a Virginian. I'm not an American. What are you talking about? I'm a Virginian. I'm a Massachusetts. I'm a New Yorker. All of that. They didn't care about the national government. There wasn't national pride yet. The Articles of Confederation did not allow for raising revenue because there was no power to tax. This one's absolutely critical, and that if this was really the straw that breaks the camel's back in the end when we talk about Shays Rebellion. We'll talk about that in a moment. There was no resource to back up its power to print. Money was worthless. Essentially, they were printing out paper that was a promise, and that promise had no financial power that was backing it. It was just kind of it was paper. That's all it was. It wasn't doing anything. There was no gold or silver backing it up. It was worthless. It was absolutely worthless. So all of the state governments couldn't give a rip about the financial printing money from the national government. They could not regulate among the states or within foreign countries. So your states were declaring wars on each other. Your states were making foreign treaties and deals, and the national government just couldn't do a thing because it wasn't in the Articles of Confederation. There was no definitive leader such as the president because at the time people were afraid of any big leader like a king. They were terrified of it. There was no judicial system to deal with the growing number of economic conflicts and boundary between states. And the biggest issue was the lack of a strong central government. No power to tax is a big deal, but in the end, there wasn't a central government. It was just a loose confederation with kind of this umbrella over the top that was letting all the rain come through it. It was a worthless umbrella that didn't accomplish anything. So, when did the Articles of Confederation change? Articles of Confederation was 1777. That all changed during Shays Rebellion. Shays Rebellion, what happened here was in 1786. Mind you, the Articles of Confederation was made in 1777. So there was this 9-year period that historians always talk about where there was essentially chaos in the United States. It's a very interesting period of history to study if you want to look that up and read about that. I think it's called, let's see here. I can't find it, but it's a good time period to look up if you're really bored. So Shays Rebellion, 1786, Massachusetts enacts a law to cash in on payment of all debts owed to it. So what happened over here is all your farmers over here haven't got paid yet after the Revolutionary War because the national government's printing money that's absolutely worthless, and now Massachusetts over here is going like bankrupt because, you know, of reasons, and they want to cash in. So Daniel Shay, former broke, he's not formerly broke, he is broke, but he is a former continental captain. He leads a rebellion. Farmers who there happens to be a bad crop, and they're also broke, and previous military join together and occupy, plus protest, plus march on the state government in Massachusetts. Everybody's scrambling. The national government couldn't foster an army to stop the small rebellion. It literally took a privately funded army from Massachusetts to stop this little tiny force of rebellion, and that made everybody freak out because they're like, wait a second, the national government can't do anything. Isn't that like, oh my gosh, everyone's freaking out. They're worried about future rebellions. And now we're going back to the center. Chapter 2, the Constitution. 1 second here, folks. Gotta make sure the music's on track. Gotta make sure it's all good. Right now we're on page 41, if you're wondering. Alright. Cool. So now we're going to be moving on to part 3. Writing the Constitution in Philadelphia. So, everyone agreed that something needed to be done. So February 21st, 1787, we have a constitutional convention. Now, the first thing we want to talk about is going to be on page 42, the characteristics and motives of the framer. I thought this is a very interesting little paragraph from page 42 to 43. It was fluff, but I didn't think it was, because ultimately what we believe the framers intended it to a large part is kind of open to conjecture and interpretation, which I think is kind of a cool parallel to how the Constitution, a lot of it is interpretation and conjecture on some parts, some of the implied things, but it was just random. So, 55 delegates that all agreed to complete secrecy. They all agreed to make a constitution, which is a document establishing the structure, functions, and limitations of a government. Now, some say it was economically driven. This was Charles A. Beard who said that in his book, The Economic Interpretation of the Constitution of the U.S., 1913. That was the first book written on the motives of the framers. By the way, if you are reading this, thank you. It means you're still here watching. You guys are awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your time. So the Anti-Federalist was written in 1961 by Jackson Turner, Maine. He suggested that the wealthy delegates wanted social order more than anything else because their property was at stake. And the third conjecture was called The Creation of the American Republic, 1969, by Gordon S. Wood. He argued that it was a social division that explained which groups did and didn't support it, concluded that the majority of framers favored order and stability over some of the more radical ideas proposed during the American Revolution. And that's going to bring you to the bottom of page 43. And now we're back up here. Now, the purpose of the Constitutional Convention was to revise the Articles. That was the official thing going in, but it quickly changed. People quickly realized something extreme had to be done. Things were starting to spiral out of control, so some plans were proposed. Now, this is on the bottom of page 43 to the top of page 44. We have the Virginia and New Jersey plans. Let's first talk about the Virginia plan. The Virginia plan stood for 3 things: 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Now, the Virginia plan was supported by James Madison and Edmund Randolph. It was based around the European state model. It was supported by larger, more populous states. It stood for a 2-house legislature with 1 house elected directly by the people and the other chosen from among persons nominated by the state legislatures, and a legislature with the powers to select the executive and the judiciary. The other model was the New Jersey plan. Now, the New Jersey plan was supported by the smaller states. So Virginia plan, larger states; New Jersey plan, smaller states. It stood for strengthening the Articles, not replacing them. These are people who stood on states' rights. It was for creating a 1-house legislature with 1 vote for each state, and with representatives chosen by state legislatures. Uh-oh, another commercial. Wow, so many commercials. I'm so triggered. All right. It also gave Congress the power to raise revenue from duties on imports and from postal service fees, and creating a Supreme Court with members anointed for life by the executive offices. So this one kind of gave the power to tax, and I thought that was kind of interesting. It was like, okay, you can have some money, but not really. So both these plans had some interesting ideas, but it ultimately came about in what became known as the Great Compromise. And by Great Compromise, I mean it's a great freaking compromise that ended up creating one of the most legendary articles of all time, known as the Constitution of the United States. Woo! Gotta love that. It's getting late, boys. Starting to lose my mind. So, disagreement concerning state representation in Congress, but an agreement was worked out. It was a mix of the Virginia and New Jersey plan. It was a 2-house or bicameral legislature. In 1 house, a legislature, later called House of Representatives, would be 56 representatives, 1 representative for every 30,000 inhabitants. Representatives would be elected directly by the people. That House of Representatives should have the power to originate all bills for raising and spending money. And the second legislature, later called the Senate, each state should have an equal vote, and representatives would be elected by the state legislatures. In dividing power between the national and state governments, national power would be supreme. All the states agreed. It won only by 2 votes. And one thing that's important to note is that it tiptoed around slavery in terms of population representation, in terms of the House of Representatives. Eventually, 3/5 compromise made slaves worth 3/5 a person, which is just disgusting. That part was absolutely disgusting. So the Great Compromise really brought the 2 plans together, and that was just so interesting that they were able to pull it off and really bring it together. A lot of geniuses working on that. So, along with the Great Compromise was unfinished. Whoa. What's going on here, boys? What's going on here, boys? Where is this? Oh, there we go. Okay. So, getting back to the Great Compromise, we're kind of figuring out where we're at right now. Yes, so, unfinished business affecting the executive branch. 4 years with an unknown amount of re-elections. This was a big thing. There was a lot of discussion on how long the president should be able to serve, and they left the re-election part unknown. That eventually would get amended later on. The Electoral College was created, which votes for presidents based off numbers in House and Senate. Founders were worried about the masses / the commoners in terms of voting. Eventually, we saw the change into its modern day form, which it is today. It also gave the House of Representatives the right to remove president if treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors occurred. And in the case that this happens, the treason, bribery, or other high crimes, what happens is House majority votes, and if that succeeds, it then moves on to the Senate, where 2/3 vote is required to fully remove. So it takes the House and Senate working together. During this entire process, the Chief Justice heads this part, not the Vice President, because we're trying to avoid bias here. And we're back to the center, boys. Oh no, Control Z. Control Z. Don't touch anything. So now, we're on the bottom. No, we're not at the bottom. We're at the top of page 46. Okay, number 4, the U.S. Constitution. So what makes up the U.S. Constitution exactly? The answer is it starts off with the Preamble. The main part about the Preamble is it talks about we the people. We the people, the power of the government comes from the people. This was huge because from now on, it is said, the start of the Constitution, it's so beautiful, is we the people. They could have started it so many ways, but right away, they essentially say the power of the government is from we the people, which is just a beautiful thing. Moving on from there, the basic principles of the Constitution. The first concept on the bottom of page 46 is federalism. Federalism is, let's talk about the federal, we got some bumping happening here. Okay, there we go. So federalism. The federal system is a plan of government in which power is divided between the national government and the state governments, in which independent states are bound together under one national government whose power is supreme. Wow, that's a mouthful. Now, essentially, national government, states, but the people are all the way on top of the national government. So it's kind of this little cycle we have going here. But this time, the national government's actually effective. The colonists were super anti-unitary system, that was British systems. The power is divided between states and national, with national power being supreme, and with the national government deriving its powers from citizens, not the states. The 10th Amendment was super important in terms of federalism because it stated that the powers not given to the national government were reserved by the states or the people. And this was further clarified the structure. It was a little bit sketchy early on, but that amendment really cleared things up and said, okay, you have rights, the rights not stated doesn't mean that there's more rights to come that don't already exist. That's the simplest way I can describe it. The next thing we talk about is separation of power. Now, let's see here. Separated power. Okay. Separation of power is a way of dividing the power of government among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, each staffed separately with the equality and independence of each branch ensured by the Constitution. James Madison's famous words, which I'm sure you've all heard before, is ambition must be made to counteract ambition. So the three key features to separation of power is legislative, executive, judicial branch, 3 separate branches, each one separately staffed, and the Constitution ensures equality and independence of each branch. Now, I'm going to zoom in on this process right here because this is the beauty, in my opinion. This is a beautiful image right here. I'm just going to let you take in this image for a moment while I eat ramen. Right there. Take a look, folks. Those are the checks and balances that were put into place, also known as the separation of power. So, essentially, let's get some major zoom in here. As you can see how this goes right here. I'm going to be using this for studying. This image is also in your book on page 47. So if you want the equivalent of this, it's there. I'm just showing you this real quick so you can see what it looks like. It's essentially a double jeopardy system, meaning that it's very hard for one branch to get away with anything because there's a double check on them by the other branches to make sure that they don't get too powerful. Moving on to page 48, let's talk about checks and balances. Actually, this was checks and balances. Yeah, this is checks and balances. So it goes federalism, separation of powers, and this is the checks and balances right here. This is the whole page is describing this right here, essentially, that one picture. So, without further ado, we now go into a very important part. On page 48, we're going to be talking about the Articles of the Constitution, starting with Article 1. Article 1 is the legislative branch. The legislative branch, Article 1, contains the enumerated powers. This is in Section 8, Article 1. And the powers denied in the Articles of Confederation are essentially stated here very specifically. So it vests all legislative powers in the Congress and establishes a bicameral legislature consisting of the Senate and the House, spells out qualifications for holding a position in office. By the way, page 50 and 51, read on your own. It's called Join the Debate. It's 2 pages. It's discussing equal opportunity in terms of being able to run for office. I'm not going to read that to you. You have to do that on your own time. But continuing onward, Article 1, Section 8, Congress, power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among several states. And now, a very important part, very, very important part. There's a general clause made after Article 1, Section 8, giving Congress the power to, quote-unquote, make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. This is also known as the elastic clause. This is super important because it's essentially, well, it's known as the necessary and proper clause, but the nickname is the elastic clause because it's essentially giving kind of a broad power to the Congress for unspoken powers that would be related to its duty that it can use because this constitutional part enables it with this clause to do things not fully implied and yet are within reasonable doubt to be related to the elastic clause. That's a mouthful. So, this is the basis of implied powers. Powers not stated specifically but are considered to be reasonably implied through the exercise of delegated power. So everybody has to agree when using the necessary and proper clause that it's a reasonable use of the necessary and proper clause. So, pretty cool stuff. Where were we? Oh yeah, over here. Article 2, the executive branch. This vests power to execute the laws of the nation into the President of the United States. The President is Commander-in-Chief Sheaf, Shifa, commander of Sheaf, Shiba, Shishwa. President is commander-in-chief of armed forces. What a mouthful. Sorry, guys. 1221, still going strong. The right to make treaties with consent of Senate. The president can create ambassadors and is required to make a State of the Union address. The article limited presidency to natural-born citizens. A new amendment would be needed to change this, and that's what I was talking about earlier with page 50 and 51, which is join the debate. Now, Article number 3, the judicial branch. It establishes a Supreme Court. It defines Supreme Court jurisdiction. Federal court decides federal law cases, and the Supreme Court is given the power to settle disputes between states. Initially, everyone was stressing out because all it did was create the Supreme Court, but it gave the Supreme Court the right to create smaller courts beneath it. So eventually all the state courts, all those other courts were established, but all of them were created underneath the Supreme Court. So that's a very important thing to note. It spells out the Supreme Court, nothing else, but it gives the Supreme Court very broad powers. Article 4, the full faith and credit clause. It mandates that states honor the laws and judicial proceedings of other states. That's a really important one. We talked about that today in school. So if I get gay marriage in a state that's legalized, and then I go to a state where it's not legalized, you have all sorts of, this is where like full faith and credit clause are starting to come into fruition, where we start seeing that more and more be an active thing and used. Article 5 specifies how amendments can be added to the Constitution. This was an important article because it was used right after the Constitution was agreed to. Article 5 was used like a lot to make the Bill of Rights. This was immediately used. Article 6 is the Supremacy Clause. It provides that the quote-unquote Constitution and the laws of the U.S. as well as treaties are to be the supreme law of the land. Super important, meaning nothing else can trump these things. All national state officers and judges are bound by national law and must take oaths to federal constitution above all else. So your average policeman, state official, even though they are a part of the state government, they are still under jurisdiction of the law of the land, the Constitution, as we all are. Also, Article 6 was important because it dropped in no religious test to hold office, and this was kind of the first example of distinct separation of church and state in the Constitution. Article 7, procedure for ratification of new Constitution. 9 of 13 states would have to agree to or ratify the new provision before it would become the supreme law of the land. So that was procedure for ratification of the new Constitution. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Now that we are done with that, I believe we are on page, one moment. We're on the drive for ratification of the U.S. Constitution. We're wrapping up, guys. We're getting there. We're back to where we started, and we're now on to number 5. The drive for ratification of the U.S. Constitution. One moment. Wow, ramen is good. Okay. Okay, hold on, folks. Hold on. So, page 53. Pretty worthless stuff, to be honest. We're just talking about the historical context, what all the people back then thought about, what all the people back then thought the Constitution was all about, all that wonderful jazz. But in the end, it comes down to two things. You got your Federalists and you got your Anti-Federalists. Let's talk about the Federalists first. Who and what they believed in. Who were the Federalists? They favored a strong national government. 85 essays were written known as the Federalist Papers. They were property owners, landed rich merchants of Northeast and Middle Atlantic states. They were elitist to some level. They were kind of scared of the commoners. They were pro-British and they were anti-French. Now, who were the Anti-Federalists? Who and what they believed in? They were small farmers, shopkeepers, and laborers. They were anti-elite. They believed in the quote-unquote common man. They were for states' right. They feared tyranny of a federal government. They wanted greater protection of the individual rights, which would eventually come into fruition, known as the Bill of Rights. That would be incoming for them. And they wanted frequent elections to avoid corruption. They were anti-British, pro-French, and they believed checks and balances would fail in the federal government if the current constitution got passed. Whew. I'm on fire. I'm on fire. 12:30 at night, boys. We on fire. We on fire right now. So where do we go from here? Oh, yes, up here. ratifying the Constitution. Oh no, another commercial. No! And these commercials are killing me, folks. It's killing me. So, right now, we are on bottom of page 55, start of page 56. We're talking about ratifying the Constitution. So, first off, essentially small states voted for it in first, and the remaining states voted yes after the Bill of Rights was promised. So your small states really liked the Senate idea, and because they were smaller, they passed the Constitution right away because they were really excited. And then all your other bigger states decided to join in once the Bill of Rights was promised. Honestly, page 56 and page 57, the upper part of page 56, 57, it kind of felt kind of meh to me. It didn't feel really important, so page 56 and 57, go ahead and read that, because what's important is on the page 57, the Bill of Rights. It was the first 10 amendments. It was sought by the anti-federalists. It meant to protect personal liberties of the individual. What is the Bill of Rights? Oh, we're having a problem. Let me go. Put me in, coach. Put me in. No, stop it. Everybody's being cruel to me right now. Stop it. No, I'm coming up here. What do you... There it is. Pretty sick memes. Alright, this is the Bill of Rights right here. I'm going to use this for my own studying. You can print screen this, but you can look it up on your own. Have fun with it, because I'm not using it. Like, I'm just going to show you that it's here. This is what the Bill of Rights is. This is the first 10 amendments. Just know that they're all pretty sick, and they're pretty important. So besides that, we're closing in. We're going to be closing in on the end, because we are now moving to our last section, which, there it is. The last section is section 6, which is methods of amending the U.S. Constitution. That is on the bottom of page 57. So, note that judicial interpretation is very important to how the Constitution is perceived and used. Page 60 and 61, if you want more info on that. So, methods of proposal and methods of ratification. Once again, I have an image right here. Page 58 describes the whole process, but this is what it comes down to right here. The proposal portion is over here, and your ratification portion is over here. It really is that simple. There's not too much else to it. It might have given an example or two, but I didn't think it was super important, but that is the process right there. And ultimately, besides that, folks, page 60 and 61 felt really not important to me at all. I'll probably reread those, but it didn't feel that important. So, what should I have learned? What should you have learned, folks? What we learned. We learned that page 61 to 62 is the summary, and I know that you are capable of reading the summary, page 61 and 62. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. This was Chapter 2, AP Government Crash Course Ramen. It was really fun making the mind map because, to be honest, it took me probably like 3 hours to make, maybe 3.5, to fully get the most condensed, important information here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I tried my best this time, and I'm probably going to keep doing this for the future. It's a lot of work, but I really like it as just I like talking, I like teaching it, I like learning from it. So if you have any feedback, be sure to hit me up. If you have any questions, be sure to hit me up. And I will probably be linking this spreadsheet sometime if you ever want to use this whole thing for studying. So this is Carter here, also known as Risk SC, whatever, like it's all good. Also, whatever you know me by in terms of gaming, or if you're here for school, whatever. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.